Today I want to talk about the concepts of marriage and family. What these terms mean can vary widely from one culture to another, but almost all cultures have some type of marriage, which can be defined as a socially approved union between two partners that regulates the sexual and economic rights and obligations between them. Family members also recognize certain rights and obligations between them, though like most other forms of social organization, family patterns can vary widely from one culture to the next. Again, almost all cultures have some form of a socially defined union between adults known as marriage, but there are some exceptions to this. The Na people of China practice what is known as walking marriage, a kind of a relationship where there is no formal union between a man and a wife, and where the man and woman in the relationship do not live together. The Na are matriarchal, meaning that women hold the power in their societies. Women make all the major decisions in the family, control the family's resources and property and so on. The Na tend to live in large homes that you see here that house several generations within the same family, and the head of this family is an elder female. Now, if you want to have a relationship with the Na woman as a male, you must sneak into one of these large houses at night in secret, like this, and make sure to leave by morning. Occasionally, this will turn into a long-term relationship, but the couple will never live together. And if a child is produced from their union, the male has little or no obligation to them. His nephews and nieces will often be more important to him than his own children. They don't share his name, and they don't live under his roof. Furthermore, there is no shame in not knowing the paternity or the father of your child if you're a Na mother. So this is the exception to the general rule in cultures around the world, as most of them have some sort of formal marriage arrangement. So how do people know whom they can marry? Again, societies tend to vary with regard to this question, but almost all cultures have what is known as an incest taboo, meaning that you can't marry members of your immediate family, and almost every culture has a prohibition against marriages between mothers and sons, fathers and daughters, and brothers and sisters, although there are a few exceptions to this in some cultures, such as the ancient Hawaiians, Incans, and ancient Egyptians. Marriages between members of the same royal family was permitted and even encouraged, but this is by far the exception. So all societies have some kind of rules about either whom you can marry, either within or without a certain group of kin, or family members. These are known as the rules of exogamy, which means marrying outside of a certain group, and endogamy, marrying within a certain group. In the United States, for example, since the end of the 19th century, marrying your first cousin is discouraged, and depending on the state that you live in, may even be illegal. But of course, this was not always true in the United States, and it's not true for many cultures of the world, many of which encourage first cousin marriage. And this is a map of first cousin marriage and cousin marriage prevalence around the world. And you can see the hotspots for first cousin marriage include North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of South and Central Asia. So when it comes to cousin marriages, we can say that the United States favors exogamy. We favor marrying outside of your family or outside of a close group of kin. But most marriages in the United States tend to be endogamous in the sense that people tend to marry other people from the same class, racial, and religious background as themselves, though it should be said that interracial marriages, while still a minority of marriages in the United States, have become more common over the last few decades. So cousin marriages, as I said, are fairly common throughout the world, and one place that they're relatively common is the Middle East, where marriages between a son and his father's brother's daughter may be encouraged. This is common to both Middle Eastern Jews and Muslims, and is partly explained by concerns about the inheritance of wealth. So if you want to look at the basis for some of the rules regarding sex and marriage in Judaism in particular, you can look at the so-called holiness codes in Leviticus in the Old Testament. It should be said that while many in the West may be repulsed by the idea of marrying your cousin, you should know that this is actually a new idea in the West to be repulsed by it, and it's only existed for about 100 years. It's true that birth defects are slightly more common in cousin marriages, but genetic problems are by far the exception to the overall overall rule, children born to first cousins are born healthy most of the time. Okay. Another type of marriage that is rare in the West are arranged marriages, where future marriage partners are often betrothed while they are still children or teenagers, as you see here. Their partners are picked out by their respective families, and they're sort of matchmaking, right? And while we may see this as strange, since we in the West more commonly marry for love, it should be said that arranged marriages have a very high rate of success, at least in part because of the strong bonds formed between the two families. The children have a strong social safety net and are not left to fend for themselves like so many couples in the U.S. So I'm going to go over two more types of marriages that you may not be familiar with, marriages that depart from the typical monogamous marriage patterns of the U.S. and Canada. You have likely heard of polygamy or having two spouses, but you should know that there are actually two types of polygamy. There's polygyny and polyandry. Polygyny is where a man marries more than one woman, and this does occur in the United States among groups including some fundamentalist Mormons, although the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the biggest church in Mormonism, outlawed the practice in 1890. Polygyny is allowed in Islam, though the religion places some limitations on the practice. So in Islam, you're required to treat your wives equally, which is not the case in all polygynous marriages. In traditional Chinese polygyny, your first wife, or the wife that produces a son, your first son may have more power in the household than the other wives. And it should be said that even in cultures where it's permitted, polygynous marriages are the minority, since it may place an economic burden on the family and their kin. Another type of polygamous marriage is polyandry, which occurs when a woman marries more than one man who are often brothers. This is called fraternal polyandry. This is a relatively rare practice today, however, and occurs most notably in rural villages in Tibet, Nepal, and India. Although it does have a parallel in some other traditions, including in Judaism, where a woman may be expected to marry the brother of her dead husband, also called levirate marriage. So these are some, but not all, of the forms of marriage found around the world. These types of marriage vary widely from one culture to the next, and as a cultural practice, the institution of marriage is something that has changed and will likely to continue to change in the future.